From their elegant shapes to their captivating glazes, Tenmoku have ensnared the eyes and hearts of tea lovers for 1,000 years. Throughout this millennium, they have served as symbols of wealth, status, and as the pinnacle of refinement, setting the stage for the aesthetic development of tea culture in Japan. Considered the most formal of Chawan and representing the elegance and sophistication of Song Dynasty culture, Tenmoku are treated with the highest level of reverence and respect, and are used for serving tea to nobles or offering tea to kami or the Buddha. The most exquisite examples are designated national treasures of Japan. As you can see, I'm a big fan of these. In fact, I have 10 moku of them with me here today, some from our shop and some from my personal collection. I lied, I have 11. You might notice that some of them are on special stands. Don't worry, I'll talk plenty about those. They're my favorite. Today we'll explore where the style came from and what makes them so special. Over the years, the term tenmoku has been applied to bowls, shapes, and glazes, and we'll cover all of these meanings in this video. When I was doing some research for this, I went back and forth on whether I should cover the history or the definition first, as the two are so incredibly intertwined. Further complicating this is that tenmoku originated in China, but were further classified and analyzed in Japan, and both Chinese and Japanese terms are used in English discourse around these ceramics. So before we get into it, let's roughly outline what a tenmoku is. Broadly speaking, tenmoku are tea bowls with a deep conical shape and a small foot, with an indented and flaring lip. Narrowly speaking, tenmoku are bowls of this shape but with a dark iron-rich glaze. So that excludes this one and this one. Even more narrowly speaking, real tenmoku are bowls of this shape and glaze fired in the Jian kilns in China during the Song Dynasty. So that excludes these two. And even more narrowly speaking, this bowl isn't actually a tenmoku at all. Do you see how this gets confusing? Additionally, today the term tenmoku is applied separately to the shape, tenmoku gata, that is one with a narrow foot, conical body, and an indenting and flaring lip. This lip is sometimes called a supponguchi or soft-shelled turtle mouth. The name tenmoku is also applied separately to the glaze, a sort of dark black iron-rich glaze, something like these three. In fact, this term is used in Western pottery for a type of iron-rich glaze that's sort of a brownish color, closer to the glaze on this bowl, and it is sometimes spelled Tenmoku with two M's and pronounced like that, Tenmoku. Throughout history, these bowls have almost exclusively been used atop lacquer stands that stabilize and elevate them. With a tiny foot, they can be a little wobbly on a table or on tatami, so ta-da! A little more stable. Today, these stands are called Tenmoku-dai or simply dai. Most dai consist of three parts: the foot or doi, the wings that you can grab, the hane, and the bowl-shaped thing that supports the bowl, the hozuki, which is the name of this plant, and they look like that plant, so they're called hozuki. Most dai are made of lacquered wood. This is one that I lacquered myself. For reasons you'll understand shortly, some chajin, including myself, prefer to use the word tenmoku as a noun rather than as an adjective. So I'll say this tenmoku rather than this tenmoku chawan, but both uses are common. Now, with this rough explanation out of the way, let's dive deeper into where the style came from, how these bowls are made, and what makes them so special. The story of tenmoku starts outside of Japan, before the development of matcha and actually a little before the development of these bowls themselves. We're going back to Tang Dynasty China. As I'll explore in detail in a future video, tea during this period was ground into a powder, boiled with salt in a big pot, and ladled into small cups or bowls for drinking. Right away, you'll notice again that the bowls in these pictures have beautiful lacquer stands. Like modern steeped green tea, this tea was translucent and had a golden hue that was best appreciated in light-colored ceramics, so celadon, porcelain, and even glasswares were the norm. In the classic of tea, the famous Yulu writes, "The color of the bowl is valued when it is green. Green enhances the color of the tea." Additionally, most Tang-era tea bowls were thin, wide, and shallow, perhaps to allow the freshly boiled tea to cool quickly and also to appreciate the color. In the subsequent Song Dynasty, this boiled tea method gave way to a new style of tea preparation, whisked tea or diencha in Chinese. In Japanese, this is pronounced tencha, not to be confused with tencha, the raw material that gets ground into matcha. This diancha was the precursor to modern matcha, but the processing was a little different and the plants weren't shaded, so it whisked up into a more whitish, yellowy brown color than the vibrant green that we know and love today. To better showcase this light-colored foam, tea enthusiasts of the time moved away from celadon and porcelain to dark glazed teawares. The preference also shifted to deep bowls with thick glazes, better for whisking in and also better for retaining heat. After all, the tea was no longer boiled directly, and all that whisking saps a lot of heat out of it. A few kilns in China started producing this new style of dark glazed tea ball, but none were as successful as the kilns at Jiang'an in modern-day Fujian province. The first reference to this jianware in the written record comes from a brief mention by Tao Gu in the mid-900s. He writes, "Tea balls made in Fujian are patterned with partridge spots and are treasured by tea connoisseurs." A century later, and these bowls are more than just treasured, they are exalted as the best of the best. Tea master Kai Xiang, in his treatise The Record of Tea from 1049, says that tea is of light color and looks best in black bowls. The bowls made at Jiang'an are bluish-black in color, marked like the fur of a hare. Being rather thick, they retain the heat so that when once warmed through, they cool very slowly, and they are additionally valued on this account. None of the bowls produced at other places can rival these. Blue and white bowls are not used by those who give tea tasting parties. Here is one such Jian tea bowl. As you can see, it has a deep conical shape, and you can see just how thick this glaze is. This is quite the hefty bowl, and when preheated, it does a very good job of holding the heat. Though Kai Xiang mentions foam, he talks about whisking tea with a gold, silver, or iron spoon rather than a bamboo whisk. It is thought that this is why so many old tenmoku have scratches on the inside. In both of these texts, the authors use the term jan or chajan instead of the earlier chawan or tea bowl, and this is a pivotal moment in the history of tea bowls, as the wan in chawan is just the generic word for bowl. And in the early days of boiled tea, tea was often made in borrowed wares such as rice bowls or wine cups. Jan, on the other hand, is used almost exclusively for tea bowls designed for diencha, which is whisked tea, implying that these were more specialized teawares. Unsurprisingly, jan made in the Jian kilns are called jianjan. Apologies for my horrendous Chinese pronunciation. The term jan is used again in another important writing from this period, this time from the emperor himself, Song Huizong, in his 1107 treatise on tea. He says, "The color of the jan is prized when it is bluish-black. Those with distinct and evenly distributed jade hairs resembling hare's fur are considered the finest. This is because such a color and luster best bring out the brilliance of the tea's hue when whisked. The base must be somewhat deep and slightly wide. If the base is deep, the tea stands up well and the foam is easily produced. If it is wide, the whisk can move freely without obstruction during the beating and the stirring." Emperor Huizong doesn't mention jianware by name, but clearly describes dark bowls with rabbit's fur glazes, just like Kai Xiang did. He also mentions bamboo whisks, so no more scratching up your nice bowl. Thus, with the emperor himself writing their praises, dark glazed chajian, and those especially from Jian, were cemented as the aesthetic pinnacle of teaware. Now we shift our focus back over the sea to medieval Japan in the 1100s, where Chinese culture was all the rage. The standard tale in Japan is that tea plants, tea bowls, whisk tea culture, and Zen Buddhism were brought to Japan all at once from Song Dynasty China in 1191 by one man, Zen monk Yōhen Yosai. But recent research has challenged this traditional story. Yosai is one of the most important figures in Japanese tea and cultural history, and he certainly deserves his own video, but even so, he cannot be credited with single-handedly introducing Tenmoku, matcha, and Zen to Japan. The discovery of a Tenmoku bowl in an archaeological excavation in Hakata, which is in present-day Fukuoka, dates back to the late 11th century, which means this pushes back the arrival of these bowls in Japan by about 100 years. It is thought that the port city of Hakata, which is one of the primary ports of trade with China, was home to many Chinese immigrants, so it makes sense that the new styles of tea culture and teaware would appear there first. There is no record of Yosai himself bringing back bowls from China, but he does briefly mention them in his seminal work from 1211, the Kissa Yo Joki, or Drink Tea and have a long life. Here he annotates a Chinese poem about tea, saying that or is a fancy name for a tea bowl with a wide mouth and a narrow bottom. To prevent the tea from cooling too quickly, the bottom of the vessel is narrow and deep. Here, Yosai is translating the Chinese word or, a poetic term, into the Japanese chasan for tea bowl, which is the Japanese reading of the Chinese cha-jan. So from here on out, because we're talking about tea in Japan, I'll be using the words chasan. Yosai's book helped introduce whisk tea culture to the warrior class of Japan, which saw an explosion in tea's popularity, and thus a huge rise in demand for these chasan. Throughout the 12 and 1300s, chasan were being imported in large numbers from China to feed this new demand. So much so that chasan and their stands begin to appear in painted works. Most textual references to these new Chinese bowls use the word Kensan. Kensan is the Japanese reading of the Chinese jianjan, which is tea bowls, chasan, from the jian kilns. Jianjan, Kensan. I promise that's the last time I'll try and do both Chinese and Japanese. From here on out, just Japanese and English. While Kensan dominates the written record, archaeological excavation has revealed that they only accounted for about half of the chasan in Hakata, with the rest coming from other kilns in China. For decades or even centuries, we only had the surviving artifacts and the written records as proof of the mass import of Chinese ceramics into Japan. This all changed in 1975 when the wreck of a Chinese trade vessel was found off the coast of South Korea. This is known as the Sinan shipwreck. Upon analysis, the boat was dated to 1323, the year it left Ningbo in Yuan Dynasty China, and sank en route to Hakata, with items on board destined for the temples of Kyoto. Of the 20,000 ceramics on board, mostly celadons, there were some 500 or so Tenmoku pieces, some Kensan and some Chasan from other kilns in China. These tea bowls were likely destined for nobles, samurai, and monasteries, as these were the only people who could afford such luxurious Chinese goods. Interestingly, all the Tenmoku on this boat were second-hand antiques with signs of wear and use. This is because by 1323, whisk tea was moving out of fashion in China, where steeped tea in teapots was the new fad. As such, no one was really making any more Tenmoku in China, and so they had to ship all the old second-hand antiques to Japan. So far, for these first 400 or so years of history, we've seen these bowls called san, chasan, and kensan, if they're jianware. So you might be thinking, why on earth are we using the term Tenmoku? Well, throughout Japanese history, many Buddhist monks traveled to China to study the Dharma and bring back new teachings and practices back to Japan. Tea itself being a fantastic meditative aid, because it helps you stay awake during long meditation sessions, was perhaps originally brought to Japan on one such monastic trip. In the 12 to 1300s, some of these journeying monks practiced Zen at temples on Tianmu Mountain in Zhejiang province and brought chasan from these temples, or from shops next to these temples, back to Japan. In Japanese, Tianmu is read as Tenmoku, and so these bowls were called Tenmoku-san. Alright, I lied. This is the last time I'm going to try and translate Japanese and Chinese into English at the same time. The first time the term Tenmoku-san appears in the written record is in 1335, just a little bit after those bowls that they ordered didn't arrive. Despite the huge influx of tea bowls from itinerant monks and ships loaded with ceramics, this still wasn't enough to keep up with demand, and so local kilns in Seto began to produce domestic copies. These domestic copies, or Seto Tenmoku, were a little more rough around the edges than the fancy Chinese imports, but they did the job, especially if you couldn't afford one of these. Their formulation of an iron-rich glaze became what we now call koseto, or old Seto. If you want to learn more about how koseto is made and the different types of setoyaki and minoyaki ceramics, check out my video on this over here. Even then, producing domestic tenmoku wasn't enough to keep up with demand, and so lacquered wooden bowls in the same shape were also made. In addition to this surviving example, there are many such bowls depicted in scrolls and screens. The production of these affordable and accessible replicas for the lay people to use only helped elevate the original imported Kensan and Tenmoku to an even higher status. The vogue of imported Chinese ceramics became known as karamonosuki, discernment for karamono, which is the word for Chinese wares. As this taste developed among the elites, tea culture was undergoing an explosion in growth and an evolution in practice. Street vendors began selling matcha served in tenmoku, and tea guessing games became a vogue at parties, and the service of tea became part of hospitality. For the elite, this hospitality aspect of tea culture gave people an excuse to show off their expensive Chinese wares. It's like using your fine china for when the queen comes for tea. Well, in this case, the emperor. And by this case, I mean the 1437 formal visit of the emperor to the shogun Ashikaga Yoshinori and his Muromachi palace. The decoration record for this visit, which is a thing, this is a piece of paper that says, I put this on this shelf in this room and I hung this painting in this room. It's really cool that this survived, and it's an amazing insight into tea culture for this time. Anyway, this record shows that no less than 31 Kensan were on display in 5 different rooms in 3 buildings. Additionally, there were 2 Yuteki and 3 Usan. What are those, you might be asking? Ask Noami, the interior decorator behind this display, as well as the author of this record and the tea master and aesthetic advisor to the shogun. About 30 years later, he and his grandson, Soami, they have rhyming names, wrote another text on the formal display of Chinese items, but this time he included a ranking of tea bowls which changed how we interact with Tenmoku ever since. So, with that big lump of history out of the way, at last using Soami's guide, the Kundai Kanso Choki, yep, that's a mouthful, I can finally introduce the different types and classifications of Chasan and Tenmoku. So let's go through these one by one in decreasing order of value according to Soami. First up, Yōhen. Soami has this to say. Yōhen, the most exquisite of the Kensan. It is unlike anything else in the world. The base is pure black, with dark and light lapis lazuli stars scattered throughout. There are also a variety of colors, from white to dark to lapis lazuli resembling a brocade. Worth 10,000 rolls of silk. Now, I did try, but converting barter amounts from the late 1400s into modern-day currency is difficult, to say the least. But 10,000 bolts of silk is a lot, especially then when it was hand-spun and hand-woven, so these are expensive. Yōhen were considered the pinnacle of genware, with a stunning iridescence that has been likened to staring into the cosmos. Yōhen, which is written with a few different kanji, usually these, means celestial glittering transformation, which, apart from sounding like a spell from a magical girl anime, is a pretty apt name. It's likely a play on the word Yōhen typically used with pottery, which means changed or transformed in the kiln, but glittery celestial transformation works for me. Today, they are most commonly called Yōhen Tenmoku Chawan, but as you'll see shortly, this goes against Soami's whole classification system, so I'll just call them Yōhen. Based on Soami's description, a few bowls have been named Yōhen over the centuries, some owned by the most famous figures in Japanese history, and subsequently lost to time, or fires. Today, only 3 such bowls survive, each one designated a national treasure and each one beautiful in its own way. The most famous of these is the Inaba Yōhen, currently housed at the Seikado Bunka Museum in Tokyo. It was owned by the Tokugawa shogunate, who gifted it to the Inaba family in the 1600s, who then sold it to the Iwasaki family in 1918, who eventually gave it to the museum. This bowl has a perfectly balanced shape with a glaze that is a deep blue-black on the outside. However, the inside is where the magic is. Its large silvery spots are outlined in a glowing silver halo that stands out from the backdrop, which itself is a brocade of blues and greens that shift with the light. Today, it is paired with an Amagasaki die that dates back to the Song Dynasty, around the same age as the bowl itself. I went to visit this bowl in Tokyo, and at the museum gift shop you can get all sorts of Yōhen merch, from scarves to t-shirts to pins, and the unfortunately sold out plushie. But I did get this lovely tenugui, which hangs in my room. If you want one, you don't have to go all the way to Tokyo, you can just head over to our shop. Next up, and my personal favorite, is the Fujita Yōhen at the Fujita Museum of Art in Osaka. The oldest known owner of this bowl was the first Tokugawa shogun Ieyasu himself. This is the shogun in the book and TV show Shogun. Ieyasu gave it to his 11th son, and it was then passed down through his family until they sold it, also in 1918, to the Fujita family, who transferred it to their museum upon its founding in 1951. Compared to the Inaba, the Fujita has a slightly wider, flatter shape and a darker, more subtle beauty. Lacking the silvery halos, the spots appear like dark voids in a sea of iridescent blues and greens that shimmer with vertical lines like the aurora. Tea ceremony researcher Yabe Yoshiaki has said, compared to the sublime beauty of the Inaba Tenmoku, this bowl is based on a ladylike grace. This bowl features a common edition found on many surviving Tenmoku in Japan, a hukurin. This is a band of silver in this case, but also gold or copper that encases the rim of the bowl. Not only does this protect the rim, but often the rim of these bowls is a little sharp and rough, so the smooth metal is nicer to drink from. The Fujita Yōhen is paired with a gorgeous mother-of-pearl inlay die, probably made in the Ming Dynasty in China. I haven't seen this bowl, but I do have a mini version of it on a keychain with like a really detailed foot. Lastly, we have the Ryokoin Yōhen housed at Ryokoin Temple, a sub-temple of Daitokuji in Kyoto. It was owned by another temple before it was passed to Ryokoin at its founding in 1616, where it has remained since. This is perhaps the most mysterious of the three Yōhen, partially because it is not regularly open to the public and it's rarely seen, but its beauty is also more mysterious. Unlike the vibrancy of the Inaba and the depths of the Fujita, this bowl is much more understated. It's the smallest of the three Yōhen and at first appears dark, plain, and unassuming. But under the light, these silvery spots appear and the deep, deep blue begins to shine, and it is incredibly intense in the halos around the silvery spots. The outside is also a deep, beautiful blue, struck through with cracks and crazing unlike any of the other Yōhen. Part of the mystery and beauty of Yōhen bowls are their rarity. How are there only 3 of them in the world, and why are they only in Japan if they were originally made in Fujian in China? One theory was that the rainbow iridescence on these bowls was considered unlucky in China, and all the other Yōhen that came out of the kiln were destroyed, and somehow 3 or 4 managed to make it to Japan. That doesn't seem to be the case because in 2012 it was revealed that fragments of a Yōhen Kensan were discovered in Hangzhou in 2009. I don't know why there was a 3-year period where it was a secret, but it was a secret. These shards were found next to other shards belonging to members of the Song imperial court, suggesting that they did use and treasure these Yōhen bowls as well. They just are rare, and a lot of them broke and didn't survive.
When I was gathering images and videos to use for this, I stumbled on some discourse that doubts the authenticity of this shard, although most people seem to agree that it's real. There have been numerous high-profile incidents of rediscovered Yōhen that have later turned out to be fakes, or at least doubtful, so I understand the caution, but I think these shards might be real. I also discovered that there was another Yōhen shard discovered in Hangzhou more recently in 2023, but no one seems to be talking about it. Probably because there's not much to go on. I mean, this is the best picture that's been shared, and there's ongoing studies, so hopefully we get better pictures and maybe a good paper or two. And apparently there was another shard discovered back in 2000, but there's like nothing about that at all published, so who knows.
Many have tried to recreate Yōhen Kensan, but only recently has anyone actually succeeded in this. There are a handful of potters in Japan and China that, through decades of research and thousands of bowls of experimentation, have been able to, sometimes, if they're lucky, make Yōhen bowls. With the Hangzhou shards, a 2016 X-ray analysis of the Fujita Yōhen, and a 2023 study of a Yuteki bowl, researchers have begun to ascertain the source of Yōhen's color and iridescence. The use of heavy metals and cobalt pigments has been ruled out, and simple thin film interference does not explain all of the phenomena. Their research suggests that Yōhen's blue iridescence is a result of structural color. This is the same phenomenon that is responsible for the beautiful blue of morpho butterflies and some other things. Some potters get close but not quite there when it comes to recreating Yōhen, like the unknown potter who made this bowl from my collection, but one of the successful potters is Yoshiaki Dobuchi. the 4th generation head of Chawan, the kiln that made this Chawan, available in our shop. It has a perfectly refined Tenmoku shape and a stunning modern crystalline glaze that is the specialty of this kiln. Leaving the glimmering world of Yōhen behind, we move to the next tier in Soami's ranking, Yuteki, the second treasure. These also have a dark black base glaze with light mottled patterns, and pale purple and blue stars are scattered on the outside and the inside. Compared to Yōhen, there are likely many of these in the world, worth 5,000 rolls of silk. Well, that's not as much as 10,000, but still that's plenty expensive. Yuteki means oil drops, and once again, that's a pretty apt description. As Soami said, these are very much more numerous than Yōhen, but they also vary quite significantly. Some have small silvery dots, and others have blue or rust-colored dots that are dripping and elongated. One famous example is this Chawan at the Kyushu National Museum that passed through the hands of Rikyu and Oribe and was later owned by Matsudaira Humai. It has fine specks that appear silver at first, but have a subtle coloration and gradient that only appears upon further inspection. The rim is covered with a gold hukurin. Here from our shop, I have a modern Yuteki made by Tanaka Kosen. Its silver fukurin stands out against the deep blue-black glaze. The oil spots themselves are subtle and subdued and only really appear upon bright lighting and close inspection. Compared to the original Yuteki Kensan, this bowl has a wider shape, making it easier to use with modern matcha whisks. One of these. Some tea schools have special chasen designed for Tenmoku bowls, but none are like those that were used in Song China or medieval Japan. If we look at the iconography, it's clear that the original chasen that were used with these bowls were long and narrow with straight tines, like this one. The splaying and separating of the tines seemingly occurred in the 14 to 1500s, and the curving of them wasn't until the 1600s. The narrow and straight tines fits more easily in the narrow bottom of these narrow bowls. Here is an antique Kensan that I would classify as Yuteki-ish. It has rust-colored irregular spots against a sort of silvery blue-black background. The spots sort of drip down towards the bottom of the bowl as the glaze melts and drips in the kiln. And here I have a modern Genware Chawan that is made in a sort of really vibrant blue Yuteki style, with the same sort of dripping effect to the spots. This bowl is closer to Yuteki, but displays some of the qualities of our next category. After his entry on Yuteki, Soami writes, Kensan. These are always numerous. The finest examples are comparable to Yuteki. The base is black and silver, the glaze is smooth, gentle, and has some dazzling stars. Worth 3,000 pieces of silk. Soami uses the generic term Kensan for all gen bowls that aren't Yōhen or Yuteki, which makes sense as these are the most common variety of Kensan. They have streaky glazes in silver, blue, and rust red, which they're known in English and Chinese as hare's fur bowls. Remember those Song Dynasty writings from earlier? These are the hare's fur patterns that they were talking about. Interestingly, in Japanese, the standard term today is Nogime, referring to the hairs on the ear of a grain. I guess the rabbits in Japan are different from those in China. Here you can see the rust-colored streaks that sort of drip down into the dark, deep blue-black of the glaze. The last style of Kensan listed by Soami is Usan. He writes, Usan, Taosan shaped. The clay and glaze is the same as Kensan. There are large and small ones. Worth 300 rolls of silk. This is usually taken to mean jet black Kensan. The U in Usan is written with the character for bird, which often gets interpreted as crow, so it's like crow black bowls. So Kensan that are really dark and don't really have any ornament, no streaky glazes or spots or Yōhen brilliance. Because they lack any ornament, they are much cheaper and much less desirable. In fact, some copies of this text just say, price, cheap. This bowl here, that I normally would describe as a Nogime, is dark and unassuming enough that you might mistake it for an Usan from a distance. Leaving the world of Kensan behind, we reach the ordinary Tenmoku. That's right, for Soami and his contemporaries, and for centuries of Japanese art evaluation and tea culture, Kensan, Yuteki, and Yōhen were not considered Tenmoku. Instead, Tenmoku referred to chasan, again bowls of this shape, that were made in China in kilns other than the Jian kilns. It's confusing, but nowadays we say that Jian bowls are Tenmoku, but back then, and for most of history, they were considered separate things. The first two in Soami's lists are often treated together. Bessan, made of Tenmoku clay, light brown and black glaze, various floral and bird crests, worth 1,000 rolls of silk. Following this, we have Taihisan, also made of Tenmoku clay, glazed with a light amber color, pale purple stars scattered inside and out. Price? Cheap. Today, these are both called Taihi Tenmoku or Taihisan Tenmoku, and these are bowls that were fired in the Jizhou kilns in Jiangxi, China. They typically have a very low foot ring and lack the grooved lip found on Kensan and other Tenmoku bowls. Sometimes they are just straight cones, and other times they just constrict slightly at the top, if at all. Many feature naturalistic glazes that resemble a tortoiseshell pattern. Others, like Soami wrote, have bird and flower designs made by using paper stencils and straw ash. Evidently, the ones with those designs fetched a higher price in Soami's day. Lastly, he simply lists Tenmoku. These are not of any use to the imperial court. They are used by feudal lords, outsiders, and guardhouses. Haikatsugi is considered the top grade, not worth pricing. Interestingly, a later copy prices them at 500 rolls of silk, but more on that in a bit. Here, Soame has lumped all of the other Chinese chasan under the label Tenmoku and says they're not worthy of his attention. Of course, to him, any of the domestically produced Seto Tenmoku would also be beyond worthless to him. However, the one type that he does name, the Haikatsugi, will soon be quite valuable. Before we leave Soami and the Kundai Kanso Choki behind, it's worth pointing out that this text is the reason why I and others prefer to say Tenmoku instead of Tenmoku Chawan. Soami separates the section on tea bowls into two parts. The first part, titled Earthenware or Pottery, contains all the classifications of Tenmoku and Kensan that I just went through. The following section is named Various Chawan and talks exclusively about porcelain and celadon wares. Additionally, in his decoration records and others from this time, Chawan and Kensan or Tenmoku are always listed separately, and the term Tenmoku Chawan never appears until a few centuries later. Scholars have agreed that at this point, Chawan exclusively referred to porcelain and celadon wares, and that Kensan and Tenmoku were viewed separately. As the popular aesthetic shifted away from expensive Chinese wares and towards the more humble values of wabi in the mid-1500s, the classical order of value for Tenmoku and Kensan, the one that I just went through, became practically inverted, and the high Katsugi bowls became the new fashion.
I didn't quite do Haikatsugi Tenmoku justice when we filmed this, so here's a little addendum. Haikatsugi means ash-covered, in reference to their often silvery, greyish appearance. However, this name is not to be taken literally. Haikatsugi Tenmoku, like the other Tenmoku and the Kensan, were fired in sagars, which are individual ceramic boxes that shield the bowls during the firing process, which means that ash from the burning wood can't settle on the bowls in the kiln. How the effect was actually achieved has long been debated, but current consensus is that it comes from a double layering of the same glaze. Compared to the metallic brilliance of Kensan, Haikatsugi Tenmoku have a more subdued and mysterious appearance, with occasional flashes of metallic luster or iridescence. This is precisely why these bowls became emblematic of the budding wabi-cha movement in the late 1400s, with its chilled and withered aesthetic sense. Compared to the flashy display of wealth that was the tea gathering in the early to mid 1400s, this new style attempted to harmonize beautiful Chinese wares with more rustic Japanese ones, swapping bright jade green celadon for dull yellow, and swapping lustrous Kensan for these more muted Haikatsugi Tenmoku. The forerunner of this aesthetic movement was Murata Juko, who likely met Noami and Soami and received a copy of the Kundai Kanso Choki. While Soami doesn't provide any description for Haikatsugi Tenmoku in his text, Juko's adopted son, Soju, gives us our earliest description of them in 1523. Haikatsugi Tenmoku. The upper glaze is entirely black. The clay is visibly black. Where the glaze stops, the lower yellow glaze is revealed. Sometimes the yellow glaze follows the edge where the glaze stops, sometimes it extends by 2 or 3 bu. If no yellow glaze appears, then it is merely an ordinary Tenmoku. The silver of Haikatsugi Tenmoku refers to a white, muddy appearance. Its presence or absence is of no consequence. What is important is that the underlying glaze be yellow. Unlike Kensan, which were known to come from the Jian kilns since their introduction to Japan, the origin of Haikatsugi Tenmoku was only confirmed as the Chawan kilns in Fujian in the past 20 years. This is due in part to the fact that unlike the word Kensan, which exists in Chinese as Jianjian, Haikatsugi Tenmoku is an entirely Japanese concept. As Juko's withered aesthetic evolved into wabicha, Haikatsugi Tenmoku became increasingly popular, and by the time that wabicha had reached its zenith with Sen no Rikyu in the late 1500s, they were the clear Tenmoku of choice. Although Korean and domestic bowls were the trendy Chawan, these old Chinese antiques were still valued. I mentioned earlier that the value order for Tenmoku had been inverted, and we know this happened because of a valuation by Yamanoue Soji, one of Rikyu's foremost disciples, who said this in 1588. There are upper, middle, and lower grades of Haikatsugi Tenmoku, though I do not know their number. 3 of the top grade have from ancient times been rested upon famous stands and are Meibutsu Tenmoku existing in various places. Kensan. Among these are Yōhen, Yuteki, Usan, Bessan, and Taihisan. I, Soji, have seen all such Tenmoku. They are low in value. In less than 100 years after Sohami's writing, the classical order of Tenmoku had been flipped. This is quite representative for this tumultuous time in Japanese history, and as things calmed down in the following centuries, the old order was restored. Make of that what you will.
As the expensive and fancy Chinese Kensan became relegated to the back burner as more people used the humble Korean and Japanese bowls, the domestically produced Tenmoku also experienced a bit of a revival. These rustic and imperfect approximations of the Chinese wares had their own sort of beauty. In addition to replicating the Chinese styles, some kilns also tried to develop new variations on Tenmoku, one of which were the White Tenmoku or Shiro Tenmoku in Mino Prefecture, probably somewhere next to Tajimi City. These were an early form of Shino ware, with a ash and feldspar base glaze. This tradition of white tenmoku passed down through the years into bowls like these, which are actually glazed porcelain wares instead of Shino wares. This one was made by Tanaka Kosen, the same artist who made the Yuteki from earlier. The white glaze on this bowl has a beautiful crazing effect, so it's a little more detailed than it appears at first. Today, these white tenmoku are usually called kinin-jawan, meaning tea bowls for nobles, as they're mostly used in the kinin temai, or the tea service to nobles, in the Urasenke and Omotesenke schools. These white bowls are paired with unlacquered, brand new wooden Tenmoku-dai, with the combination of fresh wood and a pure white bowl, symbolizing purity. The kinin temai is often seen as a more simple version of the Dai Tenmoku temai, which is the service of tea to a nobleman using a real Kensan that is passed down from China. As Tenmoku are mostly seen as extremely formal these days, you rarely find them actually used in a tea ceremony and even less in day-to-day life. They are mostly used for offering tea to the Buddha or to the gods of a shrine during a tea offering or kencha. That being said, I like using them all the time because they're really fun, because you get to use these things. As tenmoku are a more formal and older style of tea bowl, when they're used in a tea ceremony, the accompanying utensils are often also old and formal, specifically the chashaku. This chashaku has no node and is carved out of a single piece of wood. Compared to the more common bamboo chashaku that have a node in the middle, those are seen as a little more rustic, and this is seen as a little more formal. Typically, though, they are usually ivory rather than wood, but for obvious reasons, I don't have a giant piece of ivory, so this pretty wood one will do for me. For most schools of tea ceremony, when tea is served in a tenmoku on a dai, the dai is placed down on the tatami and the bowl is lifted up from it and drank from directly, which to me doesn't make much sense because, as you've seen in all the iconography and scrolls and pictures that I've shown you throughout this video, you use the saucer. There's a reason it's on a saucer. It's stable and it keeps your hands cold from the hot tea bowl. So in my school of tea ceremony, the Ueda Sokuryu, we use the saucer.
Okay then, cocky David from the past, that's a bit of an oversimplification. Well, we are taught to drink with the Tenmoku on the Dai, that's really only for the first sip. After that, we put it down, pick the Tenmoku up, and finish the tea just by drinking straight from the Tenmoku. And this practice seems to line up with some older tea practices. Here, this is an article by Sakuyama Yumika, which compares Tenmoku and Dai usage in tea texts and diaries from the 15 and 1600s. And this quote here from the Usoshu, one of the relatively early tea texts, says, "A noble will drink 2 or 3 sips while the Tenmoku remains on the Dai, then removes it and examines the tea color before continuing. It is difficult to finish drinking while it remains on the Dai. Inferiors first receive it on the Dai, but immediately remove it and drink from the bowl alone." So it seems that our samurai class school has inherited the head guest or noble's procedure, and the other merchant class schools have inherited the inferior guest's practice. The Bunri Sojin Boku, a slightly later but still relatively early text, has nearly identical instructions. When drinking from a Tenmoku on a Dai, first drink 2 or 3 sips while it remains on the Dai. Then set it down, lift only the Tenmoku and examine the color of the tea, and continue drinking. If accompanying a noble, even with an ordinary Dai, one should remove the Tenmoku from the Dai from the beginning. Young people should also do so, even when no noble is present. And it also has some slightly more nuanced instructions. If the Dai is a meibutsu, which is a famous object, remove the bowl from the Dai from the beginning. Even after finishing, do not return it to the Dai. Return the Tenmoku and Dai separately. So it seems that historical Dai usage was actually a little bit more complicated. There are actually a lot more nuances that are outlined in this article, but these are the 2 most salient points that I thought you might find interesting. So there's some historical tidbits for you to ponder.
Making tea and drinking tea out of such historic pieces of ceramic art is truly wonderful. As you've seen from this video, these bowls have a rich cultural history that spans from China to Japan and traces back over 1,000 years into the Song Dynasty of China. And the fact that the culture of drinking whisk tea in a Tenmoku on a Dai is still around in some form is frankly quite amazing, and interacting with this culture is truly very enriching for me. So I suggest that you give it a try. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new about these bowls, please leave a like. If I left any questions unanswered, let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now that we've covered Tenmoku as well as Kohiki and Mishima, let me know which style you want me to do a deep dive on next. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day and a nice bowl of tea.